We're on to week 5 of the NFL season. Here are 5 players I'm making sure are in my fantasy lineups this week. All right, we're starting with an obvious one, Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. And maybe it's not all that obvious because last week was really the first time that it felt like Woody Marks, took over that Houston Texans backfield. But very encouraging that we've seen an increased snap share every week this season. 11% in week 1, 27% in week 2, 48% in week 3, then 57% of the running back snaps in last week's win over Tennessee. Marks finished that game, 17 carries, 69 yards, 4 catches on 5 targets for 50 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 1 receiving touchdown. And that was in a game where Houston really wasn't moving the ball until late, didn't score a touchdown, didn't reach the red zone until the fourth quarter against Tennessee. Houston, they need to look themselves in the mirror. You got to find something dynamic in that offense outside of Nico Collins. I think that's part of the reason that we've seen more Woody Marks. He gets a great matchup. An excellent matchup this week against Baltimore. You're on the road, but that Ravens defense was already struggling. Now down at least 3 or 4 key starters. No Matabike, no Roquan Smith, Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, Kyle Van Noy, all ruled out or expected to be ruled out of this game. Even before that rash of injuries, the Ravens were struggling on defense. Baltimore gives up almost 35 fantasy points per game to the running back position. That's dead last in the NFL. Given up 29 catches, over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air to running backs, 7 catches, 50 yards per game is about what that equates to. I'm betting on that workload progression to continue for Woody Marks. D'Amico Ryan said this week, he's, quote, excited to see how much more Woody Marks can handle. We love to hear that. Get him out there this week against the Baltimore Ravens. I'm starting him comfortably as an RB2. Next on our list, another running back, another rookie, Cam Skattebo of the New York Giants. So Skattebo rostered pretty much everywhere, but he was only started in about 60% of leagues last week. And with Skattebo, it's really all about volume. The Giants are starting a rookie quarterback. They played very, very conservatively last week against a very good Chargers defense. But that meant they had to lean heavily on Cam Skattebo. 25 carries, 2 targets, turned those into just 90 total yards. But I think that volume could continue as long as Tyrone Tracy is on the shelf. And this is going to give Cam Skattebo a real opportunity to run away with that job. I view last week as the blueprint for what you want to do when you have a rookie quarterback making his first or second career start. Let him make a few plays, let him get loose on the ground a few times, but control the ball, avoid those killer mistakes, avoid the interceptions. Skattebo on paper this week, it's a much better matchup against the New Orleans Saints. Saints ranked 26th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 20th in opposing team success rate on the ground. So if that volume continues, I think we could see significantly higher upside this week for Cam Skattebo. All right, next on our list, we have a wide receiver in that same game. Didn't think I would come into this talking Saints-Giants, but here we are. Chris Olave, another guy who's rostered just about everywhere, but was started in less than half of ESPN leagues last week. It's been a relatively quiet start to the season for Olave, as you'd expect. The Saints aren't scoring a ton of points, but Olave still ranks as the wide receiver 25 on the season. He's put up double-digit PPR points in all 4 games, so hasn't truly bottomed out. Hasn't really had a splash game either, but he's not giving you nothing. When you dig in on the numbers, they're pretty favorable. You really just need a little bit more out of Spencer Rattler, who's actually been above average this season in terms of completion percentage over expected. He hasn't really made mistakes, just 1 interception through the first 4 games. But Olave is way up there in terms of expected fantasy points versus actual fantasy points, one of the biggest discrepancies in the NFL among all receivers thus far. He's also 5th in the NFL in team target share, north of 30%, which is ultra elite. And we're starting to build enough of a sample here where this feels real. Only Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, JSN, Jamar Chase rank ahead of Chris Olave right now in percentage of team target share. So the targets have been there on a weekly basis, 42 of them through these first 4 games. Like to see him be a little bit more efficient, a little more explosive on those targets, but this could be the week going up against the New York Giants. The Giants are giving up the most fantasy points per game this season to wide receivers. They've given up the most catches. They've given up the most yards to the wide receiver position so far this season. So if there's going to be a Chris Olave breakout, maybe it comes this week. I'm making sure he's in my lineups. Another running back I'm comfortable starting this week, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So as I record this, the Buccaneers continue to be cagey about Bucky Irving's status. One report says he's week to week. Todd Bowles says maybe he's day to day. Either way, he's in a walking boot right now. It certainly feels to me like he's going to miss at least 1 game. And if that is the case, I think it's time to dust off Rachaad White, who's been toiling behind Irving this season. Essentially had that job ripped away from him, rightfully so, by Bucky Irving midway through last year. Now, we know Sean Tucker, who did have some moments last year, he'll be in the mix, but Rachaad White to me is the guy. If you're going to start one of those Tampa Bay running backs, if you're going to trust either of them this week, I'm going Rachaad White. He's still seeing a reasonable snap share every week, mixing in behind Bucky Irving. And remember, Rachaad White 2 years ago, 2023, was your RB4 overall in PPR. Still finished as the RB22 last season, despite losing his job. On paper, this is a tough spot for the Bucs. You're going cross country. You're facing a really good Seattle defense. Seahawks do rank third in the NFL in EPA per rush allowed. They've been really strong against the run, but they have been exploitable to running backs through the air. Entering week 5, Seattle ranks dead last in receptions, dead last in receiving yards allowed to running backs. They're giving up almost 8 yards per target to the running back position. Christian McCaffrey, he went 9 for 73 in week 1. Jalen Warren, Kenneth Gainwell combined for well over 100 receiving yards in week 2. Trey Benson even had 5 catches last week. That's where Rachaad White excels. He's made his bones as a pass catcher in the past, comfortably in RB2 territory for me this week. We'll finish out with a quarterback for you. If you're looking for that second quarterback in a super flex league, I don't mind rolling Sam Darnold out there on the other side of that Buccaneers-Seahawks game. Maybe you need a sub for Jordan Love. Maybe you just need that second quarterback, but I like Darnold this week. I was looking at some advanced numbers for all the quarterbacks through 4 weeks, and we have seen a lot more of the Sam Darnold from last year than we have the previous iterations of Sam Darnold in Seattle. And that was a big question mark to me coming into the year. Could he have that same level of success that we saw last year in Minnesota? So far, number 2 in PFF grade, number 5 in quarterback EPA, number 3 in success rate, number 1 with a bullet in completion percentage over expected, second only to Justin Herbert in terms of avoiding turnover-worthy plays. Like Seattle, this Tampa Bay team does excel at stopping the run. This is a spot where I think Darnold probably has to throw the ball if Seattle wants to win this game. Tampa Bay, number 1 in the NFL, 2.9 yards per carry allowed to running backs. Could be tough sledding for Kenneth Walker, for Zach Charbonnet, but Tampa Bay's given up about 22 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and they played Michael Penix, CJ Stroud, Tyrod Taylor, and Jalen Hurts. So you do have a couple runners in that group in Taylor and Jalen Hurts, but again, I don't expect Seattle to really do a whole lot on the ground. I think this is a game that Sam Darnold has to air it out probably 30, 35 times. He's coming off of 3 really consistent fantasy performances, struggled in week 1, but 17.8, 16.7, 16.1 fantasy points over the last 3 weeks. And the latter 2 games were low volume. They blew out New Orleans. They didn't really have to throw in that game. And then you had the Arizona game on Thursday night. I think there's a higher ceiling this week for Sam Darnold. I think the Seahawks have to air it out on that Buccaneers defense. Very, very comfortable starting Sam Darnold as my second quarterback in week 5.